You got fired from your job, so you drowned your sorrows in booze. She had to get a part-time job working the grocery store cash register. The only reason she could earn a wage is because the manager liked the way she looked in that skirt. You remember, right? Exactly 10 months back.
I memorized it, or at least I memorized partial of it. Hello! Welcome to the second episode of Surviving This Horror podcast, or Surviving This Horror. This episode is interesting in the way because I already recorded this episode live through WIUX's Pledgeathon, but I'm gonna be real, I thought that recording was really ass. I spent I didn't delegate my time well, but I don't think the recording got saved, but that's fine. It gives me more clearer audio, less technical difficulties that I had to, and actually time for me to thoroughly express all my thoughts on today's topic, the beautiful, illustrious Silent Hill. I also want to start off with apologizing that I'm really congested. I'm not sick, but I've just been really congested for the past couple of weeks, so I'm sorry if I sound really nasally and gross. Anyways, this is Surviving This Horror. It's a podcast where I discuss how epic and cool the nature of horror video games. I enjoy them a lot. Really, it's just a space for me to rant about horror video games and why they rock. Thanks to WIUX for sponsoring and assisting in the production of this podcast. I'm Lily. I will be your host. And each episode, I will talk about the timeline, the legacy, and the cultural impact that a specific game has on pop culture and the cultural zeitgeist. Like I said earlier, I'm going to be discussing Silent Hill. It's the second grandpappy of survival horror video games, right behind Resident Evil. Resident Evil and Silent Hill are both this married couple of being the foundation of what survival horror is today. We'll just start off I want to give the background and main history of the first handful of games, but also I guess the franchise as a whole. But the first 4 games are really the main games, or only the ones that people actually care about and give a shit about, were developed by Team Silent, which is a very fitting name, and they were developed between 1999 and 2004. I think they were actually called I'm pretty sure they were called Team Silent because Team Silent consisted of these young, rebellious rapscallion developers that didn't really fit in any other developing teams through Konami. So they put them all together because it was a silent secret team of all these misfits, but I'm going to get into that a little bit more. The development history was really dramatic, in my opinion, especially after the second game, and I'll also get to that. But much like Capcom with Resident Evil, Konami saw the success of what they did, and they wanted their own horror game franchise that would be super successful in the West, because it was, like I said in the last episode, the West, as in the States, is a brand new profitable video game market at the time that they could capitalize on and make a shit ton of money. There was a lot of conflicting ideas that Team Silent had, which eventually led to the disbandment of the team after the 4th game was published, I guess, where the developers just didn't really know what to do with the franchise. So, for example, they slapped ideas together in the first game, and it was really profitable, and then they slapped new ideas on top of those old ideas together for the second game, and it was profitable, but not as profitable as the first game. And after that, that's when the drama really occurred between the 3rd and 4th game. So Konami wanted to ramp up production, so Team Silent was split into 2. One group worked on Silent Hill 3, and the other group worked on Silent Hill 4 at the exact same time, but the games would be released at different times. I believe the games were actually released a year apart. And this is kind of commonplace in the video game industry, where multiple teams will be working on the exact same game and the exact same franchise at the exact same time, but it will just get published and released at different dates. And this just split up concepts and ideas even more, because the developers already didn't really originally have an idea for Silent Hill. They eventually did after the first and second game, but it still was very experimental, very like artsy in the way where they didn't have like a core. It's not like a linear shooter, a linear game. It's a very like abstract game in the way where like there's a lot of symbolism, a lot of experimental landscape and gameplay and so on. But this just split up ideas and concepts even more, causing the developers to get not really know what direction to take the franchise. Hence why Silent Hill 3 and Silent Hill 4 have really polarizing game themes and environments. Like when you compare Silent Hill 3, is that return to that cult horror and psychological horror elements that the first Silent Hill game had, but in Silent Hill 4, it is like really brand new for the game. It was very like kind of out of the blue because it was brand new characters to the franchise. It was a murder mystery with psychological horror thriller elements, and it like kind of not really took place in Silent Hill, but kind of did. It was very conflicting and polarizing between 3 and 4. And because of this split, these games actually financially bombed for Konami, and the team died. They just disbanded, and first of all didn't really like the work ethic with Konami, so they just wanted to leave after that. And the future of the games were developed and handed to various studios outside of Japan, in Europe, I believe. And that's where those like really shitty Silent Hill games come. But this also brings me to a tangent of like the issue that major video game publishers and big heads like Konami and Capcom and I guess Nintendo or Bethesda's a good example of one. They only see games that are financially successful if they bring in like millions and billions of dollars. But that's not really the definition of a game being successful. Like a game can still bring in a shit ton of money, but not like millions and millions of dollars, and it's still like huge and extremely popular amongst people, kind of like Silent Hill. Silent Hill is a super popular game, especially like Silent Hill 3 and 4. Those are like cult classics, super popular games, and if you're like a horror gamer, you know those, they're staples. But because they didn't bring in like hand over fist money to make CEOs and execs even more happy, and like compared it to other super popular games like fucking Monster Hunter or something like that, it makes them upset and they just see it as a bomb. It's a two-sided scale. It's a two-headed coin. It's black and white. It's either you bring in billions and billions of dollars, millions and millions, because the game is super successful and will always be successful even after the release date, or the game is a financial bomb and they're never ever going to reproduce another game like that ever again. And it's a really bad issue, especially in the modern video game sphere, because it doesn't give light to their really creative and original ideas and like games that might be doing something new. And then also just they don't value or look at like why the people like the game or like how broad and popular the game actually is. They just see the numbers, they just see the money. So now let's get into the franchise speedrun, kind of dividing the games in the franchise into different eras or phases. Starting off with phase 1, these are the OG games, the foundational games and classics that molded the franchise for what it is today and actually creating the image of Silent Hill. So in 1999, the very first Silent Hill game came out. You're basically just playing hide and seek with your daughter in a town post coal mine explosion. That's a fun fact, by the way. Most people might not know this. Silent Hill is based on a town in Pennsylvania called Centralia, Pennsylvania, which was like kind of like a Rust Belty town with that story of like it was a huge population boom because of the coal mining industry in the like 20s to 40s, I believe. I don't know. But then there was a coal mining accident where the coal mines caught on fire and basically fucking exploded under the feet of the town. So it's like this town is constantly foggy and steamy, and it's like a closed off town that you can't visit because the soil's on fire. Underground is on fire. But just it's so fucking bad for the environment, but it created this like really eerie ghost town effect because first of all, there's no fucking people that live in this town anymore, and there's a constant fog because it's mist from the burning coal. And the developers, Team Silent, like, I don't know how they found out about this, but they figured it out and just like, yeah, we can make a game out of this. We can do it. Anyways, 2001, Silent Hill 2 came out. It's about a man with repressed trauma that takes some places that he wouldn't even go with a fucking gun. This is like, it ramps up how actually terrifying Silent Hill is. And then from 2003 and 4, Silent Hill 3 and 4, what a coincidence, came out, and like I said, that was like during that whole split time. So Silent Hill 3 is about a Midwest emo girl, like a Midwest emo girl simulator. She's very moody and it's very alt. And then Silent Hill 4 is you're fixing a hole in your wall by just basically punching in more holes in your wall. And if you check out that game, it will just make more sense. Phase 2 of the franchise is We're Just Dead. Like, it was such a sad drop off that the franchise just died. It basically was just, this is when games were getting handed to developers outside of Japan, outside of Konami, and using the IP and loose lore fun facts about the game to basically just sell copies and make money. But in reality, the games were like barely even Silent Hill games and barely even like fucking fun video games. They were boring and poorly made pieces of shit. And it's really just like a sad death of the franchise due to the internal rupture of the team, to that greed from the Western appeal, and these new games just lost the magic and the spark of the image of Silent Hill. And bad games just really came out after Silent Hill 4. They also financially bombed, so they just kept trying over and over and over again, where they just weren't bringing in money, because I think people were smart enough to know, like, oh, these games are shit, so we're not gonna buy it. Starting off in 2007, Silent Hill Origins, see, I sound so nasally, it sounds like I'm saying oranges. Sorry. It's a trucker with daddy issues, and it's supposed to be a prequel, I guess. 2008, Silent Hill Homecoming. This is the first game to be out of Silent Hill, and psych, it's actually in Silent Hill. And then 2009 and 2012, Silent Hill Shattered Memories and Downpour came out. I don't really, like, give a shit to investigate. I think Shattered Memories is, like, the icy one that you could play on the Wii for some weird reason, but it's just an example of repetitive gameplay that just makes you fall asleep. Phase 3, the final phase, is the "and we're so back" phase. It's just a breath of fresh air, either with new creative ideas to already add to this creative IP, and they use creative ideas that actually make the franchise fucking terrifying again. And then also, of course, there's remakes and remasters and reinterpretations. And I'm going to be talking about these two a lot in a little bit. But in 2014, PT is the most accurate representation of, like, what schizophrenia would be with Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead for some reason. And then from 2024, the Silent Hill 2 remake came out, and that's also why I really want to talk about this Silent Hill, this franchise a lot, because the remake came out for Silent Hill 2, and everybody was just, like, coming in their pants, was so excited, because it looked so good. I'm also gonna get to the not drama, but, like, more issues with that, but it just looks so good, and people are just like, yes! Return back to form! Yay! And I also talked about this in the live recording, if you were there to listen to it, but at the time, the game came out, like, I think literally a day before that, so it was, like, everybody was playing it, and everybody was talking about. But in my opinion, it's just like the decuntified versions of the original characters with updated controls. But it's still really good. And then for the future, for further dates, there's more Silent Hill content to come out, specifically with Silent Hill F. I don't know what the F stands for, but it's like if a Cal art student or Chicago art student made their own Silent Hill, and Silent Hill is already pretty artsy, so it's just like double artsy. Some important characters to talk about is James Sunderland. He's the protagonist of Silent Hill 2. He's just a very, very sad man. Harry Mason. He's the protagonist of Silent Hill 1, the first game. He's kind of like, he's just the dad looking for his daughter. He's kind of like little personality, but he has like really funny, because it's low polygons, it just looks like he's wearing like cardboard clothes. Like, you know, the cardboard prom dresses that people would make? Those duct tape prom dresses that people would make in like early 2000s high school. That's what it looks like. It's like all of his clothes are just so rigid and look uncomfortable. There's Alessa. She's like the female version, the little girl version of the Omen. Well, the Omen's just basically the second coming of Satan. What is that called? The Antichrist. That's what it's called. She's just like the little girl version of the Antichrist. She's like specifically from like the Omen 2000, early 2000s movie, specifically that version. There's Pyramid Head. He's another like main icon of Silent Hill. When people think of Silent Hill, they think of the Fog, they think of the Bubblehead Nurses, and they think of Pyramid Head, who are like the most iconic boss in monster design. There's Heather Mason. She's the daughter of Harry and she's the emo Midwest girl. There's Dahlia Gillespie, she's the cult leader. There's Lisa, she's like this nurse side character who has like a really tragic death. And then there's, of course, Maria and Mary. Maria/Mary. They're part of Silent Hill 2. They're the main reason why James went to Silent Hill. And that has major lore implications that I really don't want to get into because I don't want to spoil. But so why? Why should you give a shit? Why do you care that I'm talking about Silent Hill and coming in my pants like a little teenage boy seeing boobies for the first time? Well, I'm gonna rant a lot this part. I'm dedicating a huge part of the episode to this, but just to start off, I mentioned this with Resident Evil. It said the video game president and kind of created a new archetype for the big object-shaped head monster thing that's unkillable and just stalks you throughout the whole game, aka I'm calling it the pyramid head conundrum. Before I explain this, let me give an example. So in the Evil Within franchise, which is hopefully a game that I'll cover later on, there's a similar enemy where he has a giant metal rectangular head that kind of looks like a camera projector. I don't know what it looks like. Let me pull it up. I don't really know what to call it. It kind of looks like a safe, I guess, but it's a giant metal box. Let's call it a safe. And there's like barbed wire around it. And it's on this really heavy built, beefy, scary, intimidating humanoid creature. Let's go with that. It looks like a human, but it's scary, and he has like an apron on. It's all like rugged and gross and bloody. And he's carrying a very, very large object. He's carrying a hammer, like one of those like meat stamping hammers. I don't know what it's called. And to compare this to Pyramid Head also is a very tall, intimidating, gross, humanoid, scary, masculine, that's another big part, creature with a giant metal shaped object. They like their geometry a lot, obstructing his face and on his head. He has a giant breasted pyramid on his fucking head, hence the name Pyramid Head. And he carries a very, very large butcher's knife. Like, it almost looks like the Buster Sword that Cloud has from Final Fantasy. Fuck, which one? Final Fantasy VII. If you just think about it, there's a lot of similarities. There's giant metal objects on their head. They're carrying giant, intimidating, spiky weapons, or just giant weapons in general. And they both have, like, humanoid, masculine, scary beefcake bodies that people like to draw porn of a lot. So this is the conundrum, is that Pyramid Head was the first enemy to have this boss design in a video game, or at least the first notable one in pop culture. And it was so influential, and it was such an iconic figurehead for this Silent Hill franchise that people kind of like copied this idea and saw how like he stalks the player. It's also another similarity is that it's a metaphor for usually the main protagonist like trauma and issues, and hence why he's stalking, or it is stalking the main protagonist, specifically with Pyramid Head, specifically with that I don't know his name, but the thing from Evil Within can also be seen twice in the Evil Within franchise with like another projector head. It has like specifically a camera head monster, and it's like really lanky, so it's a little bit different. And I kind of also want to relate this back to the Resident Evil popularity, is that Nemesis was this giant, terrifying, unkillable monster that also stalked the main protagonist. So there's a lot of strands of similarities through the survival horror subgenre of video games, where it kind of creates this brand new archetype, which I think is really interesting, because when I like think all the way back to middle school, I think archetypes were like created like when I was reading fucking Beowulf and Shakespearean literature. Like that shit is from like so old. So seeing like new archetypes in modern literature, modern media is really interesting to me, because I just like didn't think it could just happen. I also want to talk about the Uncanny Valley. That's another, it's not really an archetype, but it's another new modern concept, where if you're not familiar, the Uncanny Valley is this scale, this large, there's a graph of it you could probably Google, but this large scale comparing what humans recognize as humans and what humans recognize as non-humans. So on one end of the scale, it's humans, it's like people, and then on the other end of the scale, it's like animals, or just like objects, inanimate objects, and then in the middle is this blending of things that aren't human, things that aren't physically alive, but have human-like features, that it creates this sense of uneasiness and disturbing features that makes it look just so close enough to being human, but you know it's not a human. Like, a great example of this is, like, robots. Like, you know they're not human, but, like, they could be constructed to have human-like features. It's really popular now. And this can be applied not just to, like, visual images, but also, like, audio and video, behavior. And I'm talking about this with Silent Hill because Silent Hill 2 specifically uses in my opinion, the uncanny valley factor with its voice acting. They specifically hired amateur voice actors, or like people who have never voice acted in their life before, and voice acting is also completely different from like a movie compared to a video game. So it's a video game voice acting is actually a lot more strenuous because you have to do like the weird sounds. like Link over and over and over again. So they hire these like amateur people. And also like in the 90s, I feel like the 90s has a lot of like just bad voice acting in games. They either sound like, most of the time they just sound really funny. They just sound like really goofy because they're not good actors. They're not like good at their job. But it creates that sense of uncanny valley because it sounds just so close enough to like how humans talk, how humans interpret dialogue and engage in dialogue and conversation. But it also just doesn't sound convincing enough to be real. It sounds so fake. It doesn't, you know it's a human, you know it's a hired paid actor. But it sounds so strange that like it could be AI generated or like just like not a normal humanoid being talks like this. And it also like just bleeds into the Silent Hill themes that like it's just so creepy and weird. And I think I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, especially with the fog, but it just really makes you feel like you're playing a game that's cursed or haunted. Next, I talk about this with Resident Evil, but it blends a whole bunch of different horror tropes and themes and imagery together, like the blend of cult horror and psychological horror. Psychological horror is huge. It's the main overarching theme, in my opinion, in Silent Hill, especially in Silent Hill 2, which is my personal favorite game. And it's just done through amazing set design, monster design. It's honestly the best psychological horror video game out there, in my opinion, because of the environmental storytelling, the enemy design, specifically expressing and symbolizing psychological trauma, and the show don't tell factor of that has to do with also the environmental storytelling of where a part in Silent Hill 2, the iconic, there was a hole in this wall, but now it's gone, and it's written blood on the wall, and that's it. You don't use it, I think you might have to use it for a puzzle. That's it. There's no other indicator saying you have to use it for a puzzle or use it to get a main item. And there's also no hole in the wall. So the whole time you're just like, who wrote this? Why'd they use blood? Did they use their own blood? Did they use somebody else's blood? Why are they obsessing over a hole? It's so eerie. And to touch back on the psychological trauma and horror a lot, the main enemies throughout the whole Silent Hill franchise, this also gets muddy with the lore, but the main enemies are what the protagonists see, and therefore the player. Pyramid Head is a good example of this. Pyramid Head is James Sunderland's boogeyman. Pyramid Head is also referenced a lot as the boogeyman, but he looks that way specifically because James entered that town. Through the town's magical, mystical, scary, spooky powers, it created all these disturbing enemies based off James's internal feelings, traumas, and so on. So Pyramid Head is actually the physical representation of James Sunderland's issues with masculinity and toxic masculinity, hence why he's like this beefed up, super strong creature. The first two interactions you see Pyramid Head, he's having very sexually explicit interactions with other enemies, and he's being very like hypersexual and violent, a violent sexual deviant, which also just shows James's repressed sexual issues. It's also theorized that the giant pyramid structure on his head and the giant sword symbolize like male genitalia, the male package, the man downstairs. It's so, like, when you nerd out and look into it, you're just like, holy shit, this is so interesting, it's so creative, but also if you don't look into it and you just look at it like as a monster, it's still scary and effective. Another good example, I don't want to pull from Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill Homecoming? I think it's Homecoming. There's a boss. Her name is Asphyxia, or its name is Asphyxia because it's a monster. It's like this gross centipede creature that has hands for its little limbs, and the hands at its head cover its mouth. Asphyxia is when you like choke or like suffocate to death. The way you kill the monster is opening the hands on the mouth and making it breathe. So it's very symbolic and ironic. It's really tragic when you get into the lore of that game as well, but it's just another good example of how trauma of either the main characters or side characters creates and fuels the monsters and monster design. And getting along with more awesome horror themes, let's talk about the most iconic thing that Silent Hill is honestly known for, and it's the fog. The fog is the main environmental set piece that makes the game scary. Fog is just this, like, another horror archetype of just, like, mystery and the fear of the unknown because it's obstructing a town or a city and it's also just creepy. It's just, like, to look on a forested mountainside valley and see just fog roll over. It's really eerie, and they use that to their advantage. The fog was used in the first game because of the hardware capabilities. The first game came out in the 90s, late 90s, so video games were still, like, primitive. They looked like Legos. They looked really bad. So they used the fog as a way to hide the rendering. You wouldn't, like, look past their horizon and see stuff pop up, so they used the fog to cover that. And it works so well as a scary environment, they just kept it through the franchise, and it just also aids them with hiding technical issues or, like, slow loading time. And it just cements the importance of creating really good atmosphere and vibes. That's the other main thing with fog. It just makes really creepy atmosphere. You could look at a brightly lit town, stock image town, and you'd be like, oh, that's happy. And then slap on a fog and, like, put it in black and white. You're just like, oh, that's, like, really mysterious and scary. It's an instant vibe change. They also use the eeriness of, I call it the Rust Belt architecture. I'm not sure if it's, like, really set in the Rust Belt, but of just, like, that rustic, like, material metal decay, especially in the Silent Hill upside down, scary. There's two versions of Silent Hill. There's the city, and then there's, like, the upside down, kind of like Stranger Things, of that, like, gross, rusted, decaying setting material. That atmosphere, and what builds the atmosphere of a game is the music. The music for every single Silent Hill game, even the shitty ones, to give it the benefit of the doubt, the music and sound design it's so good. It's so good. Like, specifically with the wonderful power of Akira Yamamoto. He's the main composer for the second game. I'm not sure if he did the first game, but the second, third, and fourth game. And he came back to do the Silent Hill remake, Silent Hill 2 remake, and it's just so good. He's just go on to be, like, a huge staple in not only the video game franchise for creating effective music that builds scares and scary environments, but he also is just, like, a really good composer and artist. Like, some of the songs in Silent Hill 2 and 3 will be, like, the most terrifying, disturbing, guttural sounds that you don't even think the human mind or a human person could create or even comprehend. And then the next song will play on the track, and it will be, like, this, like, alt-rock guitar riff that, like, is out of, like, you're just like, wait, this is a banger, what the fuck? To end it off with a huge rant that I referenced earlier, I really want to take time to talk about the resurgence, but specifically with PT in the Silent Hill 2 remake. PT is a great example of what makes a game actually feel haunted and cursed, and it used the IP in a creative way to actually create something and completely ignored and disregarded the fact for it being a cash grab. The game actually, when it released, when you could download it, it had no monetary value, whatever. You did not have to buy it. You just had to download it. So they did not give a shit. It was really scary. But it's super unique and probably the most effectively scary game that I have played and that most people have played probably within the past 20 years or so, because it's actually horrifying and disturbing and terrifying in every single sense of what makes a video game scary. From the concept to the execution of the gameplay, the atmosphere, the visuals, the storytelling. Everything is so haunting that it, like I said, it actually just makes the game feel haunted. It makes you feel like a Sonic.exe. I found a curse disc at a yard sale and it was written in red, blah, blah, but it's like that. You literally, like something you stumble upon and then now it's haunting you. It literally, it's so good. Oh my god. It had a silent drop, funnily enough, match the name in the franchise or whatever, but which just means like the game just dropped and released out of nowhere. There was no announcement, there was no dates or big kit and caboodle beforehand, and like I said earlier, it was free because it was technically a DLC, I guess, but it was a free game. So it just really felt like people were like stumbling upon it, and people found out the game through word of mouth because no one actually like advertised it on billboards or anything. People uploaded it on YouTube or whatever, and it was just word of mouth. I could talk about the importance and the tragedy of this game for hours and so on, but I'm gonna try to like wrap it up a little bit. Starting off with the creative direction, it was made by Hideo Kojima and Jinjo Ito, who are like really huge, influential figures in media, modern media, and modern horror media. Hideo Kojima is the producer, creative mind, creator behind the Metal Gear Solid franchise, which is another huge video game franchise that has a lot of really like creative gameplay and creative ideas, and I also get my dick hard for it. And then Shigeru Ito, he is a manga artist. He made the iconic Uzumaki, Goyo, what else? Tomie. He made these iconic page-turner jump scare novels that a lot of people recognize, but they work together to make this game so fucking scary. The game itself, like I referenced earlier, just really does feel like a mental illness simulator because the gameplay loop is that you're walking down a never-ending, repeating hallway. You go down a hallway square, so you go straight right, straight right, straight right. You're going down a giant square loop. And the hallway either changes in there's like, it's like a hallway in a house. So there's like windows, a front door, there's photos, there's litter, there's rugs, there's a bathroom, so on. But the hallway will either change in extremely minor details that you'll never notice, or extremely drastic, where like the lights will change red and everything's spinning and now you're really fast because you're on speed and ketamine. And it's just let me try to summarize more. There's obtuse puzzles that just have zero direction. There's no paper or no like hand holding at all. There was no directions whatsoever, which also influenced the word of mouth thing where everybody was kind of working together to figure out what even the puzzles were. You didn't even know if there was puzzles. And it just makes you feel insane for searching up and down in this hallway, trying to figure out reasons why things might be connected. There's wonderful fourth wall breaking with the way that people actually had to figure out that you had to speak a name into your PlayStation for one of the puzzles, which is a huge fourth wall break. The enemy design with the main enemy, the main ghost or creature that haunts you and stalks you, along with that stalking archetype that I talked about. Her name is Lisa. She's this like terrifying 9-foot tall woman. It's really tragic and really graphic, so I don't want to get too much into it because it can be really like gut-wrenching, but she just slowly follows you, and then when she gets you, she chokes you and like starts eating your body, and she just looks like a bloated corpse. It's terrifying. At the time, people didn't even know PT was a Silent Hill game. And this has to do with the whole sadness and drama with it, but Kojima, long story short, used to work for Konami. Metal Gear Solid is a franchise under Konami, and he wanted to do something with Silent Hill, so he made PT, and through the puzzle solving, your reward of figuring out the puzzles was that PT was a teaser, and there was a trailer cutscene for the new Silent Hill game called Silent Hills. And it had Norman Reedus, Daryl Dixon as the main protagonist because Kojima is a star fucker and he loves putting Daryl Dixon in all of his games. But because of his breakup with Konami, this utterly just killed that idea and killed any possibility of there being a Silent Hill game specifically for Kojima or a Silent Hill game in general, especially at the time. But now we're in this wonderful, happy period of Rebirth, where there is Silent Hill content coming out and to come, specifically with Silent Hill 2 Remake. It's a great example of how remakes of old games should be done, remakes or remasters, because it's extremely faithful to the original games and story and puzzling and setting, but it updated it with modern gameplay mechanics so you don't actually feel like you're fighting against the controls. The original Silent Hill games in the early 2000s had major issues that the games were it felt like a chore to play. It was the most uncomfortable gameplay, controller handling, whatever, ever for you to ever experience. They updated the voice acting, which I was personally worried about because when they released the first trailer, I think like a year or so ago, it showed footage from one of the most famous cutscenes where James is touching his face, staring into a mirror, and monologuing about how he's sad. And my biggest concern is that this is so dumb that they made him look too sad. Like they made him look like, you know that image of like SpongeBob with a giant single teardrop? I was afraid it was gonna look like that. He looked cartoonishly depressed. So I was worried and had this bad projection that the whole rest of the game was going to be really bad. Like overacting, like over dramatization. But I was wrong. The voice acting is especially for James and Maria and for Angela, is so raw and real and rooted in their worlds, but also rooted in ours. And it's so guttural and depressing and real and raw, and it just is it's so good. It's so good, which makes it really important for scenes like I just mentioned with the hand in the mirror, but also like the final cutscene with James and Mary, his wife. It just makes it seem so heartbreaking and gut-punching once you like know the lore and the whole twist and everything. It's so sad. It's so sad because the voice acting carries that. But to wrap everything up, I'm recorded a lot, so anything is gonna be a fun time. To close everything, Silent Hill is pretty complex. It has a complex history, and then it has a complex story, I guess, and environment, and so on. It's important for pioneering the popularity of survival horror, and specifically psychological horror as a subgenre. Not even in video games. It just really puts psychological horror as a main scary version of horror in media in general. And it created a couple new archetypes and settings, like with the fog and Pyramid Head. Also just mainstreamed horror video games, much along with Resident Evil, into a vaster, wider audience. And which is really cool. We're still talking about it today, and this game came out 1999. If you dig this and you want to hear more, go to WIUX's website on the podcast tab, or you can listen through Spotify, Apple, or Newgrounds to stay up to date on new episodes and info. Or if you have any suggestions, go follow Surviving This Horror on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Newgrounds. All are at survivethis.wiux. And once again, thank you so much for WIX for the assistance, and thank you, the listener. Thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it, and stopping by and listening to me rant about why Silent Hill rocks. I'll see you next time.